Hey gamers, I've been piloting this utility support Chronomancer build inspired by and built around feedback, which I think is a really fun skill, and I think honestly kind of OP, no? Because other skills, I think there is a cap to the damage you can do, but with feedback, there is no cap on how many projectiles you can reflect. There are limitations on how many times a projectile can be reflected, which I think is only twice before it completely disappears if the enemy is not using projectiles to attack you. For example, if they were using lasers or wells, obviously you can't reflect those. But in World v World, there are a lot of projectiles, and some of them come with CC, so you actually bring a lot more CC and damage to the fight than what you would initially think about this build, considering it is a utility support leaning build. I also think of feedback and more generally reflect as a double value skill, and what I mean by that is when you look at other forms of damage mitigation such as healing or barrier, the enemy is still getting a hit off. So let's say for example the enemy's damage is 5,000. With heal and barrier, the enemy is still hitting you or your ally for 5,000, and you're mitigating that damage by either healing it back up or having a barrier up before the enemy attacks. With reflect skills, not only are you mitigating the attack itself, if it is indeed a projectile, you are also attacking the enemy with it. So rather than only mitigating 5,000 damage, you are also inflicting 5,000 damage. So the total value or the total magnitude is 10,000, which is double what the original attack was. So those two characteristics of feedback make it a very compelling skill for World versus World, where there are upwards of 70 to 100 players using projectiles. Another aspect of feedback that I really enjoy is using it as a field or spatial control type of skill, specifically because it is uncapped, so the enemy can't really throw skills at it to make it disappear. So for those 6 seconds that a feedback bubble exists on the battlefield, you can really control that space because the enemy is probably going to be hesitant to push through that bubble field. And we'll discuss more on how to use feedback tactically in World versus World, but I want to start getting into the skills and traits now. Obviously, we start with feedback because that is the whole reason this build was created. Then we take Mimic, which doubles feedback. So now instead of only lasting for 6 seconds, feedback can last you for 12 seconds, and you can have 2 bubbles if you so wish. And then I always have Blink no matter what build I play, especially if I'm not in voice comms with a commander, because Blink is a highly valuable get out of jail free card. It's a stun break, it's a very far distance closer, and you can even pair it with Mimic to really escape from the battlefield if your team starts to lose. For my healing skill, I take Mirror because 1, it fits in with the theme of this build and I think really adds to the build identity, and then 2, it's on a very short cooldown, so I don't have to stress out about getting really good value out of it or not. I just use it and then it's up again in 15 seconds or less. And for my elite skill, I go with Gravity Well because I think it's the most impressive elite skill that Mesmers have access to, and I feel like if I'm playing Chronomancer and I'm not taking Gravity Well, it feels kind of a waste, honestly. It's also a group CC skill, and granted, yes, it only catches 5 people, but it does multiple CCs in its animation, and so I think it really stresses out players that get caught in it, so I like using it on players who are out of position to either secure the kill on them or burn their stun breaks. So now moving on to specializations. Starting with Chronomancer, we go 1-2-2. Focusing specifically on illusionary reversion, which gives us alacrity. I want feedback up as much as possible, and the easiest way to achieve that is getting alacrity, and the easiest way to achieve alacrity on Chronomancer is to shatter with 3 clones. So illusionary reversion gives you a lot of alacrity to continue spamming feedback and Mimic. Alacrity also recharges your shatters quicker, so it's easier said than done, but you can definitely get 100% alacrity uptime with this build. The next specialization tree is Inspiration. We go 1-1-1, and the first trait we take is Medic's Feedback, which gives us another feedback bubble that we can use on the battlefield. The way I like playing around Medic's Feedback, especially in large team fights, is I don't actually get a full revive off on my allies during team fights. I only tap revive to get Medic's Feedback, and then I move off of them and continue moving with the rest of my team. And then we take Warden's Feedback, which gives our focus weapon skills reflect, and so now you can see kind of the build identity crystallizing itself. There is a lot of reflecting missiles in this build, and I already think that focus is a strong weapon for world versus world because of temporal curtain, the pull. So I think Warden's feedback, giving focus skills reflect as well as reducing the recharge rate, really push it over the edge of being super strong in world versus world. And then for the last trait, I think you can go with either mental defense or restorative illusions, but I decided on mental defense because I'm not leaning into the healing aspect of being a support, I'm leaning into the utility side of it. And I think that mental defense offering you a stun break as well as offering your teammates a stun break is extremely high value, and I think this is another get out of jail free card. And it gives you resistance, which I think in world versus world, especially in large scale team fights, provides a lot more value than simply healing, because positioning I think plays a bigger part in determining if you survive or die. And for our last trait line, we go with Chaos, starting with Master of Manipulation. Since we have 3 manipulation skills, that gives us access to some quick Aegis. And Aegis is pretty nice. We get good value over time because we have 3 manipulation skills. I think if you run with any less, then it would probably be better to go with Illusionary Defense instead. And for the second trait, I'm stuck in between Chaos Transference and Auspicious Anguish. I think they both add to the tankiness of the build, but depending on what you really value, either could be a really good choice. Chaotic Transference gives you a reliable regen when you use your Shatter 2 skill, and in the Chaos trait line, when you get regen, you also get concentration, so this further boosts how long your alacrity can last. And then Auspicious Anguish gives you some more survivability just in case you ever find yourself getting caught out and getting CC'd. And then for our last trait, we go with Bountiful Disillusionment for access to stability on Shatter. Since we shatter a lot, we get a lot of stability, which I think is pretty nice. We also provide a lot of boons for our team because we also get a lot of concentration from this build as well. Bountiful Disillusionment provides a lot of value and synergizes very well with our build, so I think it is the most optimal trait. However, I will say that Chaotic Interruption is a much more fun trait to go in lieu of providing boons. Sometimes I'll run this build with Pistol Offhand, and I think that synergizes very well with Chaotic Interruption, and I think turns this support utility build into a much more offensive support build because you set your team up for securing kills. Although if I'm ever playing outnumbered or if my team is struggling to win Stone Mist Castle, I would definitely go Bountiful Disillusionment just to be able to provide stability. Okay, so now let's discuss equipment. The meta for support builds is going Minstrels because it gives you access to toughness, healing power, vitality, and concentration. However, I opted for Wanderers because in the pursuit of making a super utility focused support build and going for as much reflect as I could achieve, I picked skills, weapons, and traits that don't provide a lot of healing, so the healing power on Minstrels would be a waste. I'm mainly looking for concentration, vitality, and toughness, and only Wanderers and Minstrels provides that. Wanderers provides power, which I think on a support build can be seen as a waste, but I think it's still better value than healing power that I don't really use on Minstrels. Plus, the power gives my skills some oomph, so I feel like I have some presence on this build rather than when I'm playing support and I feel like a sitting duck sometimes just healing. It also gives this build some more variation from the standard support playstyle because at the end of team fights, I actually have a lot of chasing potential thanks to the added power attribute. For my relic, I go with Relic of Phoebe so that I can cleanse any movement impairments. Positioning is key for World v World, and my heal skill is on a short cooldown anyways, so I get a lot of value from Relic of Phoebe in helping my team reposition and helping them when they get caught out. Immobilize is one of the most annoying conditions because you can't even stun break out of it because it's not a stun, so having access to a movement cleanse every 10 to 15 seconds I think provides a lot of consistent value throughout large team fights. For weapons, our main weapon set is Scepter Focus. Definitely Focus because we get the Reflect from our trait, and then Scepter is a reliable way of generating clones. It gives us some range as well as a block. I spend the majority of my time on Scepter Focus, and I'm usually just spamming Scepter 1, the auto attack, just to generate clones and shatter them so that I can generate alacrity. For Focus, I'm careful to weave it in between all of my reflects. Again, Reflect doesn't have a cap on how many projectiles it can reflect, so I want to extend the amount of time that I can have reflect up during a fight. For the secondary weapon set, I think the standard is sword and shield. Shield because it also adds to the build identity of being a bubble chronomancer. You get access to 2 blocks, and I think blocking is another form of uncapped value because while you're blocking, as long as the enemy team doesn't have unblockable on them, sometimes they do and sometimes, you get screwed up, but the majority of the time they won't, and they'll end up using a lot of their cooldowns on you, which I think really adds to kind of how you're supporting the team, right? So rather than directly healing the team, you're kind of absorbing all the damage and tanking for the team. And sword, I think, helps with the chasing potential, but I think the second weapon set is pretty much freestyle. Anything you really like playing could probably work here. I think spear is another interesting choice too, and maybe go for more of a hybrid support damage dealer kind of build. I think offhand pistol is another fun one to try because it adds a lot of CC and chasing potential to this build. My rule of thumb though is if I'm outnumbered and our team is struggling, I go with a shield because shield definitely adds a lot more survivability and uncapped value, whereas pistol I think is more fun for where team fighting is a bit more even and you want to spice things up by being a more aggressive and damage dealer type of support. For my sigils, I go with cleansing and energy on both weapon sets. I think it's just a standard on Mesmers especially because it provides a condition cleanse. And for my rune set, I go with Rune of the Herald, specifically for at least 25% boon duration, and then toughness gives me some tankiness. Anything that provides vitality or toughness would work, but I think the key factor here is getting the 25% boon duration so that I can reach maximum alacrity uptime. Okay, before we get into some focused gameplay, I want to walk you guys through the core gameplay, rotation, skill priority loop. I start with mimic, feedback, and I try to time them to extend as much as possible. I want feedback and mimic on cooldown as soon as possible so that my alacrity can start recharging them quicker. Then I'll use my focus skills to get some more reflect, and for focus 4, rather than immediately pulling, I try to leave it up for the whole duration and then pull at the last second. And then I'll heal as needed, or if I'm standing in front of my team to try and reflect some more projectiles. Somewhere along the way, a teammate will get down, and that's when I will tap revive so that I get my medic's feedback. So that is another 6 seconds of feedback being available. As I'm weaving the different reflecting skills, I am auto-attacking, and whenever I reach 3 clones, I shatter 1, 2, 3 so that I can get alacrity. I save shatter 4 for emergencies. Sometimes it's tough to get all 3 clones up before shattering, so I try to get at least 2 up, but even just 1 clone is already better than shattering with no clones. And whenever it's up, I'm always looking for openings to do a double gravity well. I also try to time it when I have feedback available so that I can get an additional feedback bubble, but the most important thing for Continuum Shift I think is getting the double gravity well. Anything you can do on top of that is just bonus. This is a team fighting build, so it does best when you are in the presence of other players. You want to stay as close to your team as possible. Sometimes you can move in front. This build is tanky enough for you to do that and kind of play out of position, but generally you want to stick with your team so you can share boons. Feedback can be used in a couple of different ways. I think the most obvious one is when you bubble your whole team. I'll use a defensive feedback on my team if it feels like we are close to losing the fight. And generally how I judge that is if I see a lot of ally downs, then I know I need to save my feedback to be a bit more defensive. Another way I sometimes use feedback is right on top of the enemy squad. This is super deadly against builds that use a lot of projectiles such as Pistol Thief or even Longbow Ranger. The closer you have a reflect skill to the enemy, the less time they have to react. So sometimes I'll even get downs without having to do direct damage to the enemy. However, my favorite way of using feedback is as a positioning tool. So if my commander wants us to move towards the enemy squad and our team is feeling a bit hesitant, I will put a bubble in between our team and the enemy team, which gives us an opportunity to take some more space. Whenever I want to use feedback as a positional tool, I'm looking for tight corners, doorways, any small spaces where feedback covers a lot of the field, making it harder for the enemy to initiate, and if they do want to initiate, they have to push into a bad position, which makes this build extremely ideal for sieging Stone Mist Castle, whether you are on the offensive or defending Stone Mist Castle, because Stone Mist has a lot of tight spaces, small corridors, and a lot of good places for feedback to add a lot of value to your team. Even though this build is much better suited for large team fights like this, it can also scale down. In large team fights, it can feel like I'm not really doing much because my CC is countered by stability. However, in scaled down fights, smaller squads tend to not have perfect stability uptime, so I'm able to find small openings to CC my enemy and secure some kills. For example, starting with this clip, we have a small skirmish outside of my team's base. I start with a mimic feedback in between me and the enemy to make some space. I'm looking for an opportunity to use my grab well. I get an interrupt, and as soon as I feel pressured, I use feedback on myself and start using my defensive cooldowns. Here you can see that my initiation allowed us to get some kills on the enemy before they were able to retreat back into this tower. This is why I like having some defensive stats, because it allows me to initiate but also gives me more time to react when the enemy starts focusing me. Okay, so now let's get into a longer Stone Mist Castle assault sequence. Here I see my teammate get down right in front of the door. That is a good place to put a bubble, so I revive him, and thankfully we get a successful revive off. Now I move back and look for a double grab well. I think that did enough to dissuade the enemy from moving forward, because 10 people potentially getting CC'd is pretty scary for them. I throw in my focus 4 in the hallway just to do some more reflect, and then again I look to bubble a bit outwards because I want them to push all the way through if they want to be effective with their projectiles. Here I make some distance and just continue harassing the enemy. I have my distortion and my blink up, so I am not afraid of getting caught out. As a matter of fact, I want them to waste their CCs and important skills on me. We get it down, but we don't get the kill off because the enemy supports their down player. And now we rotate around the other side of Stone Mist because the enemy has split us off from our main squad. Now I get close to reuniting with my squad, but then I get knocked off of my mount. I put a bubble up, and here I decided to use distortion instead of my blink because I feel like I didn't have a good angle for a really high value blink, and I would rather save my blink as my stun break for later. So we have a lot of answers to not dying in that hallway. Again, we have this bubble right in front of the doorway, and we're able to get our teammate up. As we push into Stone Mist, I feel like this is where this build brings the most value. I'm able to put deep reflect skills that push the enemy back. And as we get closer and closer to the center, I'm looking for a double grab well. Perhaps I messed it up, but I know the double gravity sound really scared them, so I think that's presence enough. And because I have blink and distortion up, I push all the way in. I kind of make my presence known, and that allows me to buy my team some space. There are a few skills that can 1vx. I feel like any reflect skill is in that category. Here I put up a few reflect skills to keep the green team in that hallway. And then as they back up, I switch my focus over to the team in the red hallway. I'm just spamming as much reflect as I can to stall them out. I don't want them coming in and getting better positioning, so I want to try my best to keep them out. As I revive my teammate, I see the enemy team walking up, so I turn my camera and get ready to blink out. As soon as I feel any damage on me or see any enemies pass my bubble, I'll blink out just so I don't go down. This build has access to both invuln from distortion as well as block if you decide to go shield. I think those two skills really allow you to scale up and provide a lot more value than one player usually would provide. Here I'm looking for a grab well opening. I see that it makes the enemy kind of back up, so as soon as my blink is up, I start charging with shield. I use shield 4 to get past their front line, which kind of breaks up their positioning a little bit. All the blocking I just did is damage that won't get put onto my teammates. I'm also pretty sure I wasted a few CCs because the enemy probably thought they could get me. But you know, you can't deal damage when I have invuln plus block plus blink. So I always look for those openings to try and waste the enemy's cooldowns as much as I can. And I think that really shows the difference in playstyle between pistol versus shield. In pistol, you can do stuff like this where you're chasing one enemy down and securing a kill. It's very rewarding for the dopamine receptors when you do secure kills like this. And I think definitely adds to the spiciness of being a support. I love healing, I love giving boons, but I'll admit, sometimes it does get a little stale, so I think having pistol here adds to the fun of this build. Whereas with shield, it can feel a bit hard to pull off the same things because it might feel a bit more clunky. And perhaps that's probably because I used to think of shield 5 as being the bigger value skill, but I think in World versus World, the higher value skill is actually shield 4 because of how much it can scale up. And I think the dopamine cycle really comes from how impactful you can be, how influential you can be just as one single player in World versus World, where a lot of the content is generally centered around large squad fighting. Impacting positioning, whether it's your team's or the enemy's positioning, is probably one of the most gratifying things you can pull off, I think, in large squad or team-based games like this. I think it feels good, especially because it demonstrates a deeper understanding of the game mechanics, right? We're moving beyond just raw numbers from the damage that we're dealing, and we're moving into positioning and looking at timing, risk and reward, player mentality, team mentality, and the culmination of all that knowledge and experience in playing the game really allow you to command the battlefield and multiply your presence. And I think that's super gratifying as a support player. So here's where I think you can see that principle in action a little bit. So instead of following my squad down into the battlefield, I go high ground and look for some feedback domes to really disturb the enemy's positioning. And I'm able to play away from my team because even though I'm a support build, my value doesn't strictly come from just healing or just giving boons out. It also comes in the form of disturbing the enemy's positioning and making it so that my team can better initiate or the enemy have a harder time responding. And really, that's the gist of the build. Look for openings, scale up and scale down with your skills and how you use them as the situation calls for it, and farm your bags, because if there's one thing about this build is you're going to get a lot of bags simply by reflecting a lot of damage back onto the enemy. If you try this build out, let me know what you think. If you see any ways to make improvements, also let me know. Thank you for watching.